So the today topic will be the motor control training for low back pain. So my slides are visible now.
Yes, sir, it's visible, sir. You can proceed, sir.
So before proceeding to the topic, actually, I have been practicing um, since 2000. So the past 20 years of practice, before 5 to 6 years, actually, I keep saying to my patient that once the disc has been prolapsed, so there is a chances for repositioning. There is no chances for repositioning disc. Okay, and only we have chances to relieve the compression over the nerve root. So in that way we can reduce the pain. Okay, so this is what I keep saying to my patients since 5 to 6 years before. Um, so before seeing this MRI, so this is MRI was taken so 25th, sorry, 20th July 2017. Okay, the patient name is Sultani. Sultani actually he was suffering in back pain, and on the time she was suffering in back pain almost 6 months, and he has consulted an orthopedician, and he was posted for surgery. There's actually this MRI has been taken on 20th July, and it's clearly suggests that there is a L4, L5 disc prolapse is almost compressing the nerve root as a 90% of root compression. So you can see in the L4, L5 nerve roots, okay, as almost 90% of compression over the nerve root. And he came to the treatment on August 25th of August. Actually, initially after seeing the physical examination, I advised her to go for surgery as the compression was 90%. But actually, the fear of pain, actually, almost she was posted for the surgery. But he got discharged because of the fear of surgery. He got discharged and he came for physiotherapy treatment. So after seeing this, actually, I also suggested that so the surgery would be only the remedy as the problem is most severe. But actually, he asked me to continue the treatment for 3 to 4 days. If it is not recovered, and she told that she will may move to surgery. So we started the treatment on 25th August 2017. On this day, actually, so we went with the modalities. So maybe 7 to 10 days. I am not sure. Maybe the 7 to 10 initial period of the pain to subside the pain. We have went with modalities. After that, actually, she was keen interest of following exercise. So once we finished the 10 days of treatment, she has been advised to take a spinal rehabilitation. So in this rehabilitation, actually, she was almost treated 6 to 8 weeks of exercise program under the supervision of physiotherapist. He has not even taken a single day in his leave in his rehabilitation program. For real. Uh, so he has not taken a single day leave on his rehabilitation program. So actually, after that, we have suggested to continue the exercise.
Sorry to interrupt. கொஞ்சம் participants கொஞ்சம் allow பண்ணிடுங்க.
Okay. Thank you. So after the rehabilitation program, she was actually almost she got relieved of pain after almost 6 to 8 months. She was able to do all his functional activity without any hindrance. So after almost 9 months over, she came with another MRI. But I have not suggested to take an MRI. Actually, she was keen interested to know the changes in the disc as the pain was completely subsided. This MRI is taken on 10/4/2018. Is almost 9 months after the first MRI. Okay, it's almost 9 months after first MRI. And this one, you can see the patient name and the date here. Okay, this MRI clearly suggests there is no evidence of spinal disc prolapse. Okay, the disc has been completely repositioned. So there is no even 90% of. You can see the previous slide. There's a 90% of compression after 6 months of rehabilitation. So the disc has been completely repositioned L4, L5, but it's actually it's lost its hydration property. But however, the disc has been completely repositioned. Even the surgery has the chances of excision of disc. But the first time I come across the disc has been repositioned without any symptoms of disc collapse. Okay, so after this, actually, I have a keen interest to check other MRI with the patient support who follow the exercise for more than 3 to 6 months, who has been attending the rehabilitation program also in a regular manner. Okay, so the next patient name is Yuvarani. Okay, so Yuvarani is the age is 34, female. Okay, she came to the treatment, physiotherapy treatment, having a L4, L5 disc prolapse. It's almost disc prolapse. She also has 80% of compression over the nerve root. Okay, and the recently this is actually the after almost 8 months of 8 months of physiotherapy treatment. She the last Feb actually I advised to take her MRI. So in this MRI, you can see the L4, L5, it's not been completely sense. Almost 10% of occlusion still is there. But compare with 90% with 10%, it's almost going to be repositioned. Maybe another 2 to 3 months, the disc may be get repositioned without any symptoms of disc collapse. This is the second patient I come across the pre-rehabilitation, post-rehabilitation MRI. And the third one, this is Satyabama patient. Actually, she also underwent physiotherapy rehabilitation almost 9 to 8 months, I think. Still, she is continuing the rehabilitation program. So you can see here L5S1 is completely prolapsed. So on the disc has been the annulus fibrosis. I think this is a completely rupture and this came out. This is compressing the nerve root almost 70 to 80% of nerve root compression, and the post X-ray, sorry, the post MRI, see here there is no evidence of disc prolapse. It's completely repositioned. Okay, so these so these things has a very keen interest towards low back rehabilitation. So actually, since 5 years before, actually I'm not sure that the disc can be repositioned. I keep advising the patient the disc can be repositioned, and we can only relieve the compression over the nerve root. But these three pre and post rehabilitation MRIs suggest that the disc can be repositioned. The repositioning, we can be repositioning the disc, we can reduce the symptoms and we can improve the quality of life. So this is what I want to give the introduction as my topic. Actually, I usually say in all my presentation, I say that actually we all know the physician can only give the life. The physiotherapy can give a quality of life. Actually, after seeing this MRI, really actually some pleasure over inside of me, saying that the physiotherapy can really achieve it, because actually the pain only we can perceive, the patient pain we can perceive that is coming down. The day 1 of treatment and the day 10 of treatment, actually we can perceive the patient pain is coming down. But however, the outcome measures only speaks. Outcome measures only speaks because the evidence and the data only will promote our treatment treatment validity. So here, this evidence is really make pleasure over me, sorry, pleasure inside me, that the physiotherapy exercise really has a pleasure, sorry, really has really can improve the quality of life to the patients. So actually, if you see the success of these patients depend on the therapist, maybe 20% to 30%, not even 20%, maybe 10 to 20%. The therapist skill would be the 20 to 10 to 20%. But I believe the 80% of result is because of the patients. Why I say this is these three patients is very opt for rehabilitation. Okay, so they have never missed a rehabilitation protocol. They have what we suggest. They have actually more than a me. The patient have the belief over the physiotherapy as well as the exercise what they follow, and the periodically they progressed from the disc prolapse to normal disc. Okay, not normal. This is about normal. So the total compression has been relieved. So the success of the treatment is not only with the therapist. The success of the treatment is also selecting the patient and the patient cooperation. So it's the patient is have a hope and have a belief that the exercise is going to help her or him. Definitely they would follow this exercise, and this doing exercise in a week or 10 days definitely not going to improve the patient quality of life. The exercise could be sustained for some period of time, so the body can adapt for the exercise and will give an effect. It's not a tablet, it's not a medication to give a result on a single day physiotherapy, because that's why actually I think we are lack, that is because the effect has not been immediate one, but it's a highly effective treatment, the physiotherapy treatment, but it's not been the immediate effect. The sustainability, the patients can sustain, because if you teach exercise to the patient, they may do 1 day or 2 days. That's actually this. They leave the exercise and they will leave. One, the pain has been left out, they will leave the exercise. But thing is, they may have a chances of recurrence. So if you want to avoid the recurrence, the exercise protocol should be followed at least 3 to 6 months. So to allow the muscle adaptation and to allow the muscle to get strengthened and to allow the muscle to get motor control. So this is what I want to give an introduction to my topic. Let's move on to my topic as motor control training for low back pain. So low back pain usually considered as non-specific and specific. What does it mean by non-specific? The non-specific is nothing but there is a no specific cause for back pain. Okay, so there is a no specific cause for it. The specific is nothing but there is some specific cause for back pain. So usually the classification, the research says the classification of non-specific low back pain is 85%. It means that 85% of back pain patient doesn't have a no specific cause. Okay, there is no specific cause. Only the 15% comes under the specific cause, like a disc prolapse, maybe a degenerative arthritis, facet pathology, whatever it is. So we can categorize only the total number of patient. In the total number of patient, only the 15% can categorize under the specific cause. It means that we are treating only, actually, the most of the time we are treating only the cause. We are not treating underlying the mechanism of the back pain. And the low back pain is a multi-dimensional problem, because you see, you all know that the low back pain is involving of sciatic nerve, as the disc and the facet joint may involve with the articulating spinal vertebra. So there's so many factors. Even the psychological factor also a part of low back pain. So it's a multi-dimensional problem. It's just a multi-dimensional. So we are treating only as a neural component, or if we are treating only a muscular component, or we are treating only a psychological component, well, not going to help the patient, as it is a multi-directional. So treatment of the LBP is mainly depend on a multi-directional approach to the patient. Okay. So what does mean by motor control? So motor control is nothing but coordinated contraction of the muscle due to the transmission of impulses sent from motor cortex to its motor unit. It's a coordinated actions, muscle actions. Okay, so especially as a transmission from the motor cortex to its motor unit. Okay, and it also has a process of initiating, directing, and grading purposeful voluntary movement. Okay, so the movement should be initiated, directed, and grading to purposeful voluntary. Grading as to purposeful is it's not a non-purposeful movement, it's a purposeful voluntary movement, is called motor control. Actually, when it's motor control is disturbed, we may have a motor control impairment. So what does mean by motor control impairment? So we have a two type of impairment, that is the movement impairment and as well as the motor control impairment. So movement impairment is nothing but a painful restriction of movement. It's one direction, maybe one direction, or it's multiple directions. The pain, there is some painful restriction to the movement is known as a movement impairment. So movement, what is the motor control impairment or movement control impairment? So this is the impairment which has the complaints of certain position, for example, sitting, standing, or in the twisted position. So this position not be, the sum of the position is not be achievable because of pain. Okay, the first one is because of, there is the one movement is restricted because of pain. So here the position is not achievable because of pain. That is the motor control. Because the position, we have a various muscle recruitment pattern, muscle sequential pattern. So this, the motor control is the complex one of all this, the muscle recruitment pattern and as well as the muscle control patterns. Okay. So here the motor control impairment is nothing but a certain position is not achievable due to position, due to pain. so it's again the motor control impairment as the direction specific, the particular direction. For example, if I bend, so that might be so I'm avoiding my bending or avoiding my sitting because of a pain. So the motor control impairment is a direction specific. Up to one third of the patient with the low back pains are estimated to have a motor control impairment. So if you take a number of also it's a total number of low back pain patient, in that one third of patient is estimated have the motor control impairment. That's why the motor control training is very, very important for low back pain. So it's not going to treat the symptoms, it's going to treat the symptoms as well as is going to prevent the recurrence of back pain. So when coming to the stability, so what does mean by stability? Is often stability, the spinal stability is nothing but a static principles. Okay, the spine when you do a limb movement, the stability of the spine is very static. So that the static base of platform give a explosive force for your arm and limbs, your arm and legs to act with the torque. Okay, so it's a static principle. So the pelvic stability is a static principle. So the exercise intervention, so what would be the exercise intervention also aim to improve the static stability. Okay, so as a stability is a static component, the exercise also should has a static principle to improve its power and endurance of the static lumbar static muscles. Okay. So the motor control exercises, mainly aims of motor control exercises is, huh? Thank you. So the aim of the motor control exercise or to restore the coordination. Actually, as I told you, the low back pain is completely impairment in the motor control. Punish. The motor control exercise or restore. Sorry, as a motor control exercise. So mainly the low back pain, the motor control impairment is the main for the low back pain patients. The aim of the motor control exercise to restore the coordinated and efficient use of the muscle. The muscle would work coordinatedly and efficiently, muscle to control support of the spine. So it should work coordinated way and the efficient way to provide the stability to the spinal cord, spinal column. And the aim of the motor control exercise to increase, the second aim is to increase the intra-abdominal pressure. Actually, I will give a brief explanation how the intra-abdominal pressure helps for stabilization. Okay, so the aim of the second aim of the motor control exercise is to increase the intra-abdominal pressure and the tension in the thoracolumbar fascia of the muscles that are directly adjacent to the lumbar spine. So once I give a brief explanation about the thoracolumbar fascia as well as the intra-abdominal pressure, you will easily gather this point. Okay, and the third one, the lumbar pain complaint have an imbalance in the motor control local muscle, especially the lumbar pain complaint patients. Okay, have an imbalance in the motor control of local muscle is nothing but the muscle which stabilizes the spinal column. So lumbopelvic stability at various level of lumbopelvic stability. We have a three level of lumbopelvic stability. As I told, the stability is as a static principle. The exercise also to aim to improve the static stability of the spine. So the first foremost level is the whole body equilibrium. Okay, whenever the force act outside from the body or internal forces, just like so limb talks, so the body equilibrium get disturbed. So once the equilibrium is get disturbed, the center of gravity moves away, and this, some portion of trunk movement is needed to stabilize the COG within the base. Okay, that's the balance. That's we say is it's a balance. Okay, when the COGs get disturbed because of the forces acting on the body needs to stabilize the COG within the base of support. That's we call it as a balance. So as I told you, this is previous actually the hip strategy is nothing but as one of the main component of regaining perturbation. That is the COG. For example, if you are traveling in the bus, if you think you are traveling in the bus, so if the driver suddenly apply a brake, okay, so suddenly apply the brake, so the body trunk as flexed, so you may lose your balance, okay, to regain your so the COG is also is away from the base, so the body is just flexed forward, and it's nothing but to restabilize the COG within the base of support. So that's we call it as the hip strategy. So the first part of the first of lumbar pelvic stability is as a whole body needs to get stabilized. The trunk needs to get stabilized, and the COGs needs to get within the base of support. And the second level of stability comes under lumbopelvic orientation. So how the spinal column is placed over the pelvis, okay? Especially it talks about the curvature and the pelvic movement and the spinal movement over the pelvis. So especially the curvature of the lumbar lordosis, these all comes. So they should be placed, the spinal column should be placed in a proper way with the pelvis. This is the second level of stability. This comes under the lumbopelvic orientation. And the third one is the must, very must. So this mainly affect the low back pain. In the low back pain, this is the main concept. This stability is first, if initially, is foremost, first and foremost affect by the low back pain. That is the intervertebral control and segmental stability. So intervertebral control is nothing but a control in between the segments. And the control in between the segments, this we call it as segmental stability. Okay, so that's the third level of lumbopelvic stability. These are the three various level of stability. So one is the whole body, and the second one is the pelvic orientation over, the lumbopelvic orientation, and third one is segmental stability. Okay, and so before moving to the stability exercise, actually we should know the load, because the load is going to disturb our stability. Okay, the external load or maybe internal load, as a various load, we have a compression load, a tension, shear force, bending force. We have so many loads will act on the body. This is going to disturb our stability, spinal stability. Okay, so this needs to be explained, so you can get the purpose of the exercise, and you can know the exercise, why it's doing, and why we are doing the exercise, and what the exercise is going to help the patient, how the exercise is going to help the patient. Okay, the load and displacement we have a terms of concepts. Okay, we have a 4 terms of concept. So what one's neural position, the second one is a range of motion, and third one is a neutral zone, and the last one is elastic zone. A neutral position. So neutral position is nothing but we all know that is a neutral spine. So what is the specialty in the neutral spine? So the specialty of the neutral spine is the overall internal stress to the spinal column, and the muscle effort to hold this posture are very minimal. That's the neutral position. I repeat once again, the posture of the spine, which overall internal stress in the spinal column, and the muscle effort to hold this posture, to maintain this posture, are very minimal. That place as a neutral position. We call it as lumbar lordosis, maintaining the lumbar lordosis, whatever it is. The neutral position is, so that is the internal stress, very minimal internal stress to maintain the position. Okay, the range of motion, we all know the physiological intervertebral motion measure from the neutral position. It start from the range of motion, start from the neutral position, and majorly is divide a neutral and elastic zone, neutral zone and elastic zone. The range of motion here we divide a neutral zone and elastic zone. The neutral zone is nothing but the part of physiological internal motion. Actually, this is a part of range of motion. Is one of the part. Okay, so the initial part is neural zone. The entire, you think the range of motion, spinal range of motion. If you think of flexion of spine, okay, the neural zone is a part of flexion. Okay, and the elastic zone, the next part of flexion. The same thing. Each and every range has Each and every range has these two components. Range of motion as for a flexion range of motion or extension range of motion, we have a neural zone, an elastic zone. Then what does it mean by neural zone? A neutral zone. Neutral zone, here, this is measured actually, it's a very minimal muscle effort. So it's a very minimal effort, internal effort of spinal cord as nothing but is the range of which where the very minimal effort of internal forces acting over the spinal cord is neural zone. As a part of actually, as I told, as a part of physiological intervertebral motion, measured from the neutral position. It starts from the neutral position, and which the range, the spinal motion is produced with minimal internal resistance. Actually, this zone, the spinal motion is very minimal internal resistance. It means that there is a very minimal resistance. The stiffness is low. There's a highly flexible region. The spine in the neutral zone is highly flexible. So coming to the elastic zone. So after the neural zone finish, the elastic zone starts. The part of it's also a part of physiological range of motion measured from the end of the neural zone. Actually, it starts from end of the neural zone. Once the neural zone so elastic zone start ஆகும். So it's a start from end of the neural zone up to the physiological limit, where the movements, the range of motion complete. Okay, so where the range of motion complete is called, we call it as elastic zone. This is the load and displacement curve of a spinal column. So what is what is the load and displacement curve? The load and displacement curve is often used to measure a physiological property of the spinal column. It says a physiological property of the spinal column, about a physiological property of spinal column. You can see here. The load has been kept on the y-axis, and the displacement is kept on the x-axis. Okay, so here the curvature is the curve of the curve is represent the stiffness of the spine. The curve represent, okay, the curve, the black dark line curve represent a stiffness of the spine. So you see here very minimal load. Actually, here there's the inverted axis, that is the inverted y and x axis shows the extension of the spinal column. So the x and y axis shows flexion of spinal column. Okay, so the complete range just start from neutral and ends in end range of motion. Flexion, and the same way extension start from neutral, end at end range of motion. Okay, so here the load kept in y-axis, if the load get increases, okay, the load get increases, the displacement has happened slowly. Think of stiffness, okay, the stiffness of this blank curve. When the load are minimal, the curve, the curve is the stiffness also very minimal. Okay, once the load is getting increased, and the y-axis increase, you can see the curve also has a higher value. So the curve also has a higher value. It means that the stiffness also is increasing. I repeat. So here the low load, there is a very minimal stiffness of the spine. So the spine stiffness is very minimal. Once the load is increasing further and further, the stiffness is also increases and reaches a maximum. The stiffness reaches a maximum at end range. At the stiffness reaches for here. So the stiffness is low. It means that the spine are highly flexible. If the stiffness is higher, it means that the spine is low flexible. So the initial range, the segmental flexibility is higher as the stiffness is low. That's we call it as a neural zone. You can see the mark from y-axis to the line. So that's is a neural zone. Okay, once the neural zone ended, so the elastic zone starts. Okay, the elastic zone starts goes with end range. It starts from the end of neural zone and it goes to end range as elastic zone. So what does mean by neural zone? Is a neural zone actually, as told, is the very minimal internal stress of the spinal column, is highly contributed by activation of muscle contraction. Okay, and this neural zone is the pain-free zone. This is a mainly contribution of active muscle contraction. The elastic zone is mainly contribution of ligaments. So the end range of movement is limited by the ligaments. Okay, and the neural zone, the highly flexible zone, this is a minimal internal resistance, is contributed by active muscle contraction. Okay, so this structure can be simply for simple understanding, we can go with ball in the bone analogy. Actually, we kept a ball in a bowl. Okay, think of we get a small ball in the bowl. Okay, so if you start to flick the bowl, the ball may move very slowly inside. That is the deepest part of the bowl. Okay, the part of the bowl. There we have a very minimal forces enough to move the ball. You start flick, applying a slide force. That force is very minimal to move the ball base of the ball. Okay, so if you want to bring the ball over the top, you have to give a that is a streak of the ball. You have to give a little bit more force. Okay, so if you push the ball a little bit fast, the ball moves to the steeper part of ball. Okay, so that's represent the elastic zone. The neural zone, whatever the apply force is very minimal. Okay, so the ball moves over the base. If you give a more force, the ball comes to steeper part of the ball, that is the top of the ball. So there, if you want to bring the ball to the top of the ball, you have to give a little more force. So the force act over the ball, so the ball comes over the steeper part, that is the elastic zone. So here the neural zone, we have a very minimal force acting on the ball as well as the spinal cord. So we have a control of lumbopelvic stability by we have a three models. We have a control over the lumbopelvic stability. These three models is controlling the stability function of spine. So the first one is the passive subsystem, and the second one is active subsystem, and third one is a neural control subsystem. The first passive subsystem is mainly osseous and ligament structure, as a bone and ligament structure. Is compromise is include vertebral body, psychophyseal joint, joint capsule, spinal ligaments. So these all have a passive system, passive control of the stability, passive controller of the stability. Okay, so this system having a stabilizing role in elastic zone. As I told you, the end range of movement is controlled by the ligaments and the facet joint. Okay, so here the passive system, the osteoligamentous structures, the stabilizing role in the elastic zone. That is the end range of movement. Okay, of the spinal motion. And the third thing is it's not providing support on the neutral joint position. It doesn't have any support over the neutral joint position. That is, it's not supporting the neutral joint position. It's only have a end range of is limiting the control over the end range of motion. That is the passive subsystem. Coming to active subsystem is nothing but spinal muscles and its tendon. It includes spinal muscle and tendon. The stabilizing role is especially the neurals, as we discussed earlier. The active subsystem, the muscle has a stabilizing over in the neutral zone. Provide the mechanical ability to stabilize. Actually, the muscle has the mechanical ability to provide and stabilize the spinal segments. And the neural control subsystem, here the neural control subsystem, input from passive, actually it has the input, it takes the input from passive and as well as active system. It takes the information from muscle as well as the ligaments. Okay, here the ligaments or act like a transducer. It means that it will act a proprioception. It will give information about the joint position, joint load, the mechanoreceptors. So the ligament is it's act as a transducer and will send the information to motor also the higher center. So the higher center recruit the muscles. Okay, the higher center recruits the muscle, which manage the stability furtherwards. Okay, so the higher center activate muscle at the right time. So these things, actually the time of activation and the amount of activation and the sequence of activation is very important. So so once they receive the information from the mechanoreceptor, the higher center activates muscle at the right time. Okay, to stabilize the spinal column, and right amount, which also, okay, how many fibers needs to recruit for that stability. That is the right amount and the correct sequence. Which muscle fire needs to fire first, and which muscle fire needs to fire the second. So that is nothing but this is the correct sequence of muscle pattern. Okay, this is decided by the higher center, that is the neural control of subsystem. As a clear, I think we have a three subsystem. One is the passive subsystem, active subsystem, and the neural control of subsystem. Active subsystem is passive system is osteo ligamentous structures, and active subsystem is nothing but your muscles, and the neural control is nothing but central nervous systems, which manipulate both active and passive subsystems. So here, if any of one is get injured, I think okay, the neural control is impaired. Once the neural control, the spinal stabilization subsystem, the other two can capable of compensating deficit in one system. For example, if the neural subsystem has a deficit impaired, the active and passive subsystem compensate the deficit, and it will overact to control the stability. As I told you in this one, the neural control unit receive the information from the spinal column, as from the spinal muscle, both spinal column and spinal muscle. Here the spinal column act like a transducer. So it give information to the neural system about vertebral position, spinal load, and spinal motion. All these that's like act like a proprioceptive receptor. So they give the information to the neural control. The neural control system act according to this information, and it will activate the muscle activation pattern. Okay, so we all know the head has been placed over the spinal cord. Okay, the critical load of head has been placed over the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is linked a thin cord-like structure. So if you think a critical load is being placed over the cord, either the cord should be a little bit thicker, so it can avoid it can avoid bending, so it can stay stable. But it otherwise supported from some assistance to maintain its stability. So this diagram represent buckling of a column. So here you can see the A is normal, that is a normal spinal cord. The over the skull weight has been placed over the spinal cord. So if the buckling, if it is in this position, the buckling may think of C. The buckling may happen as the cord is very thin. So if you want to avoid the buckling, so what needs to be done? Either the cord would be bit thicker than the normal. You can see the B1. So here the cord is bit thicker, so the critical load stays stable. That is, as the load of skull stays stable over the spinal cord. But here, in the normal human beings, we don't have a thick spinal cord. It has the various. It's not a single bone. It has a segmental. It's a number of vertebra is participating in the stabilization. So here it's not possible to thicker the spinal column. So it has a tendency of buckling. So what would be the mechanism to maintain the stability? So the muscle act like a guy wire. So the front and back muscles, look at the D, the front and abdominal and paraspinal muscles act like a guy wire, and it will stabilize the spinal column when the critical load of skull is applied over it. So in this way, we can divide muscle, actually the muscle of stabilizing muscle in two way. So one is local muscle and another one is the global muscle. Okay. So what does mean by local muscle? The local muscle has attachment over the spine, direct attachment over the spinal cord. We can represent this this muscle pattern in a pirate ship. Okay, if you think of pirate ship, the pirate ship, when center we have a column, the column has been supported with the various ropes. Okay, and this is not enough to this rope is not enough to maintain the column in a straight position. So we have a guy wire from front of the ship, in the corner of the ships, and from the back of the ship, the guy wire passed to the center, and it has been attached to the center column to maintain the stability of the central column. The same thing happened in the spinal cord. The local muscle, which has a direct attachment over the spinal cord, which provide the segmental stability, and the guy wire is the global muscle. Okay, the global muscle, which it doesn't have a direct attachment over the spinal cord. However, this muscle has been contribute to stabilize the spine. Okay, so here there's the second picture. You can see the spinal cord. What is the effect of a local muscle? If this local actually the go if the local muscle is not having contributed properly, the segmental stability. Okay, the segmental stability is lacking. The motion between the movement between the spine vertebra to vertebra is increased, as leads to instability of the spine. Okay, here the same, the next diagram also represent the same. The spinal cord, as I told you, it's not a single bone, it's as a segment. It's actually it's the vertebral bones. They have so many vertebral bone. So here, in between two segments, there is need of stabilization that's provided by the local muscle. So as I told you, what's mean by local muscle? So local muscle has a deep origin and insertion of the lumbar vertebra, okay, and control the stiffness and the intervertebral relationship of spinal segments. It controls the stiffness of intervertebral spinal segment. Is essential for stability. The local muscles are very essential for stability, but it's not sufficient for stability. So only this local muscle is enough. It's not been enough because the muscle are ineffective. These local muscles are ineffective for control of spinal orientation. When the spinal is in orientation, the spinal the trunk movements or when is the force applied to the body. So those time this local muscle contribution is not enough to maintain the stability of spinal column. So is essential but not sufficient for stability. Among the actually among the one of the muscle is the multifidus. You can see actually the multifidus muscle on the posterior aspect of the spinal cord. Spinal column. So it has attachment over to vertebra attachment, stabilizes spinal column during lifting and rotational movement. That is the main function of multifidus muscle. This multifidus and transverse abdominis is a key factor of stabilization. And the next one is the unisegmental muscles, such as intraversi and intraspinalis. It's not a mechanical stabilizer. These muscles are not a mechanical stabilizer. It's a force transducer. It means that it acts as a proprioceptive. It role is the proprioception to intimate a central nervous system about the force acting over the spinal cord. The transverse abdomen is the deepest abdominal muscle. So you can see in the picture, this is the lateral aspect of the transverse abdomen is the deepest abdominal muscle, warp around the abdomen between the lower ribs and top of the pelvis. It's functioning like a corset. It's like act like a belt over the spinal cord. And the global muscle. So next to the system encompasses the largest superficial muscle. This is the largest superficial one. They don't have a direct attachment over the vertebra, but cross multiple segments. It doesn't have a it doesn't have attachment on the vertebra, but it crosses the multiple segments. That's why it's capable of torque generated of spinal motion and act like a guy wire rope. As I told you, is act like a guy wire rope to control the spinal orientation, especially balance and the external load applied to the trunk. Okay, and the transfer of load from thorax to pelvis. It transferred the load from thorax to pelvis. All this is a function of global muscle. The main limitation of the global muscle is can't control the intervertebral motion. It's not possible to control the intervertebral motion by global muscle. However, a slightly false statement because the global muscle also has a participation in the segmental control indirectly. How I say indirectly, the global muscle has a compressive force over the spinal column. So this compressive force will assist the movement, the torque rotational movement, and the torque, so the rotational movement and the shearing force of shearing force of segments. So at the same time, as I told you, the force applied to the segments by the global muscle to maintain the stability. Okay, so if you think of if you're sitting on the bad posture, if you're sitting on the bad posture, you are activating the global muscle more. You are activating the global muscle more, so that lead high compression over the spinal column. Okay, so the bad posture activate the global muscle more, and thus activation produce the compression over the spinal column. This continuous compression over a prolonged time of compression over the spinal column that leads to degeneration of the spine. That's why the sitting jobs and the bad posture, who maintain the bad posture, having a chances of a degeneration disease very soon. Uh, so this is the major reason for degeneration. So overacting of global muscle. So as I told you, the core stability is mainly depend on intra-abdominal pressure, how the intra-abdominal pressure is going to act over the core stability. Okay, as the main academic knowledge of the structure, which can understand us, which allow to understand us about the core and the intra-abdominal pressure relationship. Okay. Um, so I can show, like you can see the left side picture. So it's mean that actually the diaphragm forms the true roof of the core, and the pelvic floor is the floor of the core, and the transverse abdominis is on the wall. Okay, and the multifidus muscle is on the back side of the core. Okay, this create so think of engine. Okay, think of engine model, which has the piston over it. As the here the diaphragm is as nothing but is act like an engine piston. Okay, the right side picture you can see the engine model. The piston is pushing down, and it increases the intra-abdominal pressure. Okay, here the diaphragm is pushing down and increasing the intra-abdominal pressure. So with this pressure is going to as is the main as this pressure is very important to maintain the stability. How the pressure is important to maintain the stability, let's see. Okay, so as I told you, the diaphragm descent within the thorax. Okay, the diaphragm descent within the thorax cause intra-abdominal pressure to increase. So that will increase once the diaphragm is descending, that will increase the intra-abdominal pressure. This is, you can see here, the intra-abdominal pressure is increasing after the diaphragm is descend. Okay, you can see the two arrows. Okay, the blue arrow, the thick blue arrow, and a small blue arrow. Okay, the small blue arrow, the intra-abdominal, once the intra-abdominal pressure is increased, the pressure is going to act over your muscles, especially transverse abdominis and the backside, the thoracolumbar fascia and the rectus abdominis. Okay, and this pressure, this intra-abdominal pressure is going to act this muscles. Okay, and the big blue arrow insists this pressure also going to act your spine. Okay, this pressure is also going to act on your spine. Okay, so this pressure will move your spinal column towards posteriorly. Okay, so this pressure, intra-abdominal pressure, move the spinal column towards posterior. But thing is, actually, already the small arrows, Hello, hello,
Sorry. Continue.
unmute, please. Okay, so this pressure is actually acting the spine and is pushing the spine posteriorly, and as I told you, is all the small arrows which is going to act the pressure going to act abdominal muscle and the thoracolumbar fascia. So once the pressure has been acted to thoracolumbar fascia, the thoracolumbar fascia push the spine anteriorly. Okay, so you can see here the two balance force by the intra-abdominal pressure. The one is acting directly through spine, and the second force is a second type of force which is going to act indirectly by thoracolumbar fascia. So this anterior and posterior pressure over the spinal column is allow us to maintain stable spine during the movement. So that's the main key role of intra-abdominal pressure in the core stability and spinal stabilization exercises. So all the spinal stabilization exercise should take care of the intra-abdominal pressure. That's why we combine the breathing pattern with spinal stabilization exercises. So here the diaphragm, actually we know the diaphragm is act as a respiratory function, but here the diaphragm is also acting a stabilizing function. As a capable of doing those two function in a different manner. Okay, so as I told you, diaphragm will descend down and increase the intra-abdominal pressure. Actually, various study has suggested the diaphragm will descend period to functional movement. Okay, so if you do a functional movement before that, the diaphragm will descend and increase the intra-abdominal pressure. Okay, and increase the intra-abdominal pressure. Diaphragm has both so once we can see the picture downside the picture. Okay, so the left corner indicate the very minimal load and the right corner indicate the maximum load. And the very minimal load, the diaphragm act as a respiratory function. Diaphragm do its function mainly for respiration. Okay, once the load has been increased, the respiratory function is getting load, and the stabilizing function is more. That's why we hold our breath once we started to lifting a weight. Okay, so the respiratory function has been as a very low. When the load has been increased, the respiratory function of the diaphragm is a very minimal compared to a stabilizing function. Okay, so the diaphragm has both respiratory and stabilizing function, and it doesn't period to the functionalness. Before doing a functional movement, diaphragm act before a functional movement. Okay, so that's why the weight training, the deadlift or squat, as to compare, so as to include breathing technique, so we can avoid a stress and strain over the spinal column. and the, and the posture on, actually the effect of posture on intra-abdominal pressure and stabilization. Okay, as I told you, the posture is the main problem for the degenerative disorder. Here is also a problem for maintaining the intra-abdominal pressure. Okay, so if you want a good intra-abdominal pressure, the pelvic floor muscle, actually the pelvic floor muscle should lies over both the diaphragm and the pelvic floor muscle should comes parallel to each other. Okay, um, if it is not parallel, so is a little bit, you can see the A picture on the red color. So the pelvic floor muscle has been not placed parallel to the diaphragm, so it increasing the lordosis of the spinal column, and the pressure is the pressure inside the intra-abdominal abdominal pressure was also vary when the posture is maintaining so overextension position. And here the lower part of the segmental stability by the intra-abdominal pressure, you can see the kidney shape of the blue in the lower picture, and that the lower part of the stabilization, that is the B, that is the lower part of the stabilization is missing because with the intra-abdominal pressure, because of bad posture. So that's the reason the bad posture has a higher amount of degeneration as well as decreased spinal stability. That's why we say the bad posture will produce a low back pain problem immediately. So not immediately, maybe some after some times. Okay. So these all about the muscle control. So that is active system of the active system of spinal stabilization. And third one is the control system of spinal stabilization. Before moving on to the control system, I just want to code a research related to the control system. Here we have a three, so experimental study. Here we have a two groups. One is the experimental group, another one is the control group. In the experimental group, we have a low back dysfunction patient, okay? And the control group, we have no history of LBP, there is no history of low back pain. Here, the intervention is the body sway. The body sway has been compared with these two groups, okay? The body sway has been compared with the three groups. How the body sway compared? They have given 8 tasks of increasing difficulties, okay? You can see the graph down. So here the A is a very minimal effort and the H is a very maximum effort, okay? So they have giving 8 tasks of increasing difficulties. For example, A, the simplest task, simplest task is nothing but to stand on both feet, stable surface with eye open. Just a standing, okay? Simplest task to stand on both feet, stable surface with eye open. Okay, they have increased the difficulties, and the H is the most difficult. Okay, the H is most difficult here to stand 1 foot. This task is insist to stand 1 foot on unstable surface with eye closed. That is the last most difficult one. So we started from simple standing and we progress the subject to the very difficult level. The difficult level is nothing but to stand 1 foot on the stable surface with eye closed. Okay, and here the partial sway has been measured. Okay, the partial sway, as you can see here, the dotted line is the control group, and the straight line, so the non-dotted line is the experimental group. Okay, so the experimental group, and the once the difficulty level has been increased, that is F, G, H, the difficulty levels is increased, the partial sway of LBP patients, the LBP subjects are also getting increased. You can see the difference on the over a H with the both groups. Over a H, you can see the control group value as well as the LBP patients, LBP subjects value. Here, the LBP subjects are has a more sway compared to control group. What it means? The single leg standing. If you ask the patient to stand single legs, the low back pain patient to ask a single leg, definitely you feel the difference. Okay, that is the increasing of partial sway. The patient is highly may feel a little difficult to maintain single limb stand when they have a back pain. So what's the reason for this? Okay, so why this partial sway is increasing with low back pain? So it's due to muscle control dysfunction. There's a lack of muscle control that leads to muscle control dysfunction. As I told you, the ligament is a transducer. Here we can see the ligament muscle relationship. Okay, what is the ligament and muscle relationship? So as I told you, the ligaments act like a transducer that will inform the higher center about the load and the position, and the higher center will recruit the muscle accordingly. Okay, once the back pain has been started, so we have a disc hernia maybe, or we have a disc bulge, or we have a disc herniation, or maybe we have a facet problem, which is also going to affect us ligaments. Okay, this ligament, those so once the ligament is getting affected, the mechanoreceptor from the ligaments has send the information to the higher center, and the muscle coordination, the muscle contraction pattern, and the muscle sequential pattern is altered by the higher centers according to the information comes from the ligaments. Okay, இங்க ligamentல இருந்து information போனதுக்கு அப்புறம், so the higher centers maybe has the control, the muscle control pattern going alter பண்ண போகுது. So the ligament வந்து is not giving a good information as because it's already getting affected. Injured ஆனதுனால அதனால good information தர முடியாது. That's the ligament muscle relationship. Okay, and this is the main for the muscle stabilization, the spinal stabilization functioning, altering the muscle activation. Okay, so this has been proved with various studies. Okay, so here the ligament muscle relationship has been proved various studies. So one of the study, the electrically stimulated lateral annulus at one level. Okay, so this study is electrically stimulated lateral annulus at one level, and the response, they have found the response in multifidus at multiple level. As I told you, the ligament and muscle relationship, once the ligament has been annulus is stimulated at one level, the multifidus muscle is activated at multiple level. For example, think of disc bulge, annular bulge. Okay, so if it is the single as L4, L5 annular bulge, maybe have a chances of increasing a muscle action over the multifidus muscle at multiple levels. Okay, so that's this study is indicating that single level disc prolapse has an influence over the multiple level of muscle response, multiple segmental level of muscle response. And the second study, the electrical stimulation has been to the facet joint capsule. Okay, the electrical stimulated facet joint capsule activated only muscle at stimulated level. So once the facet joint capsule has been stimulated, it activates muscle at only the activated, that simultaneous level. If you are stimulating the facet joint at L4, this stimulation activate at L4. There's a multifidus muscle at L4 segment level. Okay, and the third type of research, they have injected the facet joint. Hello. The third level of research stage, that is a facet joint injection. So they have injected lidocaine and the physiological saline to the facet joint. They have found muscle response has been decreased. Muscle response has been decreased. So this is the main reason. Excuse me, please. Okay, this is the main reason. So the facet joint, we have given a local injection to over the spinal cord. So that's the reason the pain has been comes down immediately. So what is mean by instability? Here we have seen so how the muscle acting over the spinal cord to provide the stability, how the motor control acting to provide the stability. So we have finished the three proposal system that is a contributing system for stability. Then we are moving to the instability. What does it mean by instability? So instability is actually traditionally we go with the radiological findings. We can see the instability through flexion and extension, functional X-ray. We can see the flexion and extension pattern. We can decide the instability, but it's not as a true instability because here the instability define the clinical instability is nothing but say segmental. So the stability between the segment is a lack of segmental stability. The instability hypos a relationship between okay. So here the traditional radiological findings is not providing the proper instability, not telling us about the proper instability, as the instability is mainly between segment to segments. So here again the ball and bowl hypothesis, we can easily understand the relationship between the motion and pain. Okay, so here the first one is a normal stable spine. As I told you, the bowl inside the bowl we have a ball. If you give a small force, the ball will going to move on. That is a neutral zone. That is we have a spinal cord. Within we have a minimal resistance in the neural zone. Okay, suppose the spinal cord is injured. Think of the spinal cord is injured. As a, for example, ligament rupture or disc problem, whatever it is, a facet problem, whatever it is, it's going to give a instability. So instability is nothing but higher movement. The spine is unstable. It's going to move more than its normal. Okay, so it's unstable. So automatically, so here the normal position, the ball, the neural zone lies inside the pain-free zone. Okay, here the neural zone lies inside the pain-free zone. But once the instability is happen, the spinal range of motion, that is the neural zone, extended away from the pain-free zone. Okay, the neural zone is increased and it moves. That's why the movement produces the pain. Okay, it moves away from the pain-free zone because of injury to the ligaments. Once it has been re-stabilized, okay, think of instability and as it has been stabilized with some internal fixation, okay, internal fixation, lumbar interbody fusion, whatever it is. So we are bringing back the stability with internal fixation. Think of the patient underwent internal fixation that reduce the range of motion. Okay, so we have a research saying, so many research saying that once the implant has been placed for the say 1 or 2 segments level, the 35 to 40% of range of motion has been decreased. Okay, here once the spine has been stabilized with external fixation, automatically the range has been the range of the spinal column would be reduced, as well as the neural zone, and the ball is well anchored on pain free zone. Okay, that's why the stabilization has immediately give the relief of pain once it has been stabilized. Okay, it's a surgical intervention. What we do is, as a physiotherapist, we can stabilize the spine with exercise, so the ball would be anchored with the pain-free zone and the pain would come down. This is the basic mechanism of stabilization exercise. So these all about the basic model of controlling unit of spinal stabilization. So the diagnosis, I'm coming to diagnosis part. Okay, so we have a diagnosis part. We have a various model actually. What we do diagnosis for back pain, we can classified. So 4 major model. One is the pathoanatomical model. So one is the pathoanatomical model. We go with the pathology anatomical problem. So that is representing pathoanatomical model. Hello. என்னாச்சு கட் ஆயிடுச்சா? இப்போ வந்துச்சா பாரு. Sorry for the interruption. So here coming to the model of diagnosis. The model of diagnosis, as I told you, the first one is the pathoanatomical model, and the second one is the peripheral pain generator model, and the third one is the psychological model, and the last one is the motor control model. The pathoanatomical model mainly to go with pathoanatomical structures, okay, the findings from pathoanatomical structures, especially by the radiograph, whatever the diagnostic tools we have. The intervertebral disc, especially the pathology from intervertebral disc, facet joint degeneration, annular tears, spondylolisthesis, those things will come under the pathoanatomical model. So abdominal findings are also commonly observed in the pain-free population. What's why it's not as ideal. It's not ideal. It mean that it's not optimate to diagnosis. Mean that, for example, if the MRI shows disc prolapse L4 L5 for the patient, the same problem we can see for the normal population, the same disc bulging who is not reporting pain. Okay, so this findings is not only for the patient, the anatomical findings, it's also the normal people normal people are also having these findings without any pain. So that's why we can't rely go with pathoanatomical, because we doesn't know whether the disc has been creating the problem, or any of the structures is involving the problem involving the problem of LBP. Okay, so that's why this is the pathoanatomical model is not reliable. Okay, so here still we need to classify the disorder based on the mechanism. So here we go with the findings. So here we need to classify furthermore with the mechanism of the of the pain. Okay, the peripheral pain generator model. So in this model of diagnosis, identification of painful structure based on the patient history. What we usually practice. So we ask the patient history and the area of pain, clinical examination finding, those things. According to these information, we could see, we could assess the patient may have this problem, the patient may have a facet problem. So those things we may have we can assess, and we can go with the physiological findings. Okay, but what the limitation of this diagnostic model is, it's treat the symptoms. Okay, for example, physical findings may be due to, for SLR, for example, the SLR would be 30-degree, maybe neural compression, or disc collapse, or maybe the pyriform syndrome, or maybe tissues gluteal muscle tightness. So many reasons are that for compression, or unable to rise SLR more than 30-degree. So if you see, only go with physical findings, there is a lack of some mechanical mechanism, which the mechanism causes of, we are just not aware in which mechanism is causes of pain, and we may treat as a symptoms. Okay, and this diagnosis model give a short-term relief instead of long-term relief. So the time of treatment, the patient may feel better. So but once go back to the functional activity, as once go back to his work, so he may have a recurrence, as we have not treated the mechanism. And the third one is the psychological model. Has a psychological model, and the central pain is the main thing. As we know, is actually the psychological component also included in the pain theory. Usually, the maladaptive coping strategy, like negative thinking, pathological fear, abnormal anxiety, reduced pain, avoidance behavior. These behavior, maladaptive behavior, usually increases the central drive of pain. Okay, the patient already having a problem with back pain, and these maladaptive coping strategy also increases central drive of pain. A social factor, a compensation system, workplace disputes, work and family tension, all those things also increase the central drive of pain. Okay, but actually the studies has research has found that the positive factors will influence over the pain, and it inhibit the pain from the central drive, and it will inhibit the central drive of pain. Okay, positive factors such as adaptive coping strategy. You can adapt adaptive strategy, appropriate phasing, reduce hypervigilance. So these positive factor has descending inhibitory factor effect over the pain. And the cognitive behavioral therapy. So, for example, if you approach the patient with the research also suggests that cognitive behavioral intervention are effective in reducing the disability in specific group, non-specific low back pain. Okay, if you train a patient with the cognitive behavioral intervention, it reduces the pain for low back pain patient. This is what about the psychological model. And the last one, motor diagnosis through motor control model. Okay, here the movement is the main thing. The movement and the motor control impairment exists with the LBP. The movement and motor control impairment exist with low back pain. Actually, we have come across. Actually, I said that movement and motor control impairment are present with the LBP. These are secondary to the presence of pain. Okay, once the pain is increased, there is a protective reflex of the body is going to avoid the movement, because if you keep moving your body, there may be a chances of injury. You are getting injured further. That's why the body is restrict the movement once the pain has been perceived. Okay, so the restriction of body is nothing. It's a protective reflex of the body take the protective reflex because over protective reflex because of pain. Okay, so that's the secondary. So this motor control impairment is secondary to presence of pain. Following an acute episode, when tissue is healing, okay, usually we have a self-healing mechanism. Okay, when the tissue is injured, initially after some stage, after acute episodes, we have a tissue healing would have normally occurred. There any problem is usually the bone healing. So it's heal itself. Okay, but thing is, once this problem has been persisted, the secondary presence, there's motor impairment is present. It's going to give a maladaptive motor control behavior, provides a basic ongoing peripheral driven. So here, the motor impairment is present to the patient. This maladaptive behavior increases the nociceptor sensation, leading to chronic pain. The primary problem would be recovered by self-healing. Okay, the primary problem would be recovered by the self-healing. Due to the maladaptive behavior, the muscle stiffness over the nerve root, or as neural compressions, neural adaptations, those things as a secondary problem, persist as secondary problem. And this maladaptive behavior is the main reason for chronic pain. As I told you, the movement impairment is associated with high level of muscle guarding, actually due to the muscle guarding and co-contraction of lumbopelvic muscle when moving into the painful impairment range. Okay, so when you are moving to the painful range, impairment range, so there is a high activation of muscle guarding and the co-contraction of the muscle that produces the movement impairment. Okay, so as I told you initially, the protective reflex, the lead this leads to a high level of compression. Okay, the once the movement impaired and the muscle guarding has been happened, this leads a higher compressing load on the articular articulation, movement restriction, and rigidity, extensive stability. Okay, so this movement impairment produce excessive stability by muscle guarding, the resulting in mechanism of tissue strain, ongoing peripheral nociception. This muscle guarding will reproducing the pain as a chronic and then sustain the pain for a long period of time. That's why the chronic back pain, has been persist for a long time. So usually the patient think the pain is harmful. Okay, and the pain hurt patients. Okay, think so. If I bend, I'm hurting my back. The patient thinking what usually the patient think is, if I bend, I hurting my back. So the fear of movement. Oh, so once this thought has been, this thought, if the patient get this thought, and the fear of movement has been happened. Okay, I won't bend. If I have a pain, usually I won't bend. So what would happen? Automatically, this tissue restriction, tissue stiffness is going to be happen. So one certain part of time, the bending is not at all possible as the tissue stiffness is has a severe tissue stiffness. So it not allowed to bend at all. So there's so many spinal patient has been advised by the neighbors or has been advised by the friends that if you bend you may hurt your spine. It doesn't, not in this way. Actually it's not like that. Okay, if you are reducing your functional activity of the patient, you are hurting the patient. So once if you have a pain, the patient having a pain, so the movement should be produced in a relaxed way, and slowly reproducing the movement, and the stretching the tightened tissues will gradually bring back the motor control over the muscle. Okay, so here this the movement, once if the patient has lost movement, the patient should not left it as it way. So the patient should train to bring back the movement pattern, so that will reproduce the motor control over the muscle. So the next one is the movement impairment, faulty cognitive coping. Okay, so once you go with the fault movement pattern for a higher hypervigilance and anxiety associated with the pain, reinforce the faulty cognitive coping. So for such as chronic pain, the patient so started to live with the pain for a long time. So hypervigilance and anxiety associated with the pain. Okay, anxiety associated with the pain reinforce the faulty cognitive coping. So the cognitive coping, the higher center coping is reinforced and believe further amplifying pain centrally and reinforcing the muscle guarding. Okay, so further this problem will increase the muscle guarding further. So once all this problem is continues for a long time, that's make a disorder. So the initial primary problem would resolve, but the secondary problem persist, will make a disorder, and it will continue the movement pattern for a long time. So the intervention, okay, how the movement pattern can be treated. So the aim of the intervention is first the patient education. So educate the patient, okay, educate the patient that the movement is not going to hurt you, the movement is not going to damage your spine. Okay, if it is happen in a proper way, if it is happen in a relaxed way, so it's not going to hurt you. The first one thing is, okay, and the second thing is the movement pattern is educate the patient with the movement pattern, why the restriction, the patient has a restriction on over the movement as the muscle guarding. So the patient needs to stretch the muscle, and they have to. This is mandatory to regain the movement, or else the problem going to worsen. These information, this education, the patient should get. Then only the patient allow you to take the movement, to allow you to treat the movement impairment. Otherwise, the self-guarding mechanism, the patient will not allow you to treat the movement impairment. So initially the aim of intervention of movement impairment is mainly the patient education. This desensitize, sorry, sensitizing the nerve system as mean that so bringing back the normal movement in a slow and relaxed way, we can desensitize the nervous system by majorly three way. Okay, the graded movement exposure, as I told you, into the painful range and a relaxed, the movement has been produced into the painful range in a relaxed way. So the cognitive strategy, the next one is how we can implement a cognitive strategy of passive approach. So we can reduce the cognitives. So we can reduce the fear and changing belief regarding the patient. We can reduce the fear of movement and changing belief regarding the pain. Okay, and the third one is the active management approach. So here we can add some more core training. All this one. Okay, the first one is the greater movement pattern. So as the movement pattern, movement impairment, so increase, there is a need of increasing movement range by the flexibility exercise, the flexibility or stretching. Okay, the cognitive strategy. the cognitive passive strategy, we have a various technique like mobilization, manipulation. Our hands-on treatment will reduce the pain, and it will give a more hope that the patient can move further. Okay, that is the passive approach or native cognitive strategy. As an active approach, we can go with a relaxation technique. இப்போ பேச மீட்டிங்ல இருக்குங்க, நீங்க போயிட்டு அப்புறம் வாங்க. Cognitive strategy approach. Active strategy is active management approach of the patient. In this one, we can include a partial. Actually, I say in this one, you can include a partial control, a graded movement, the cardiovascular training, graded functional rotation. So this is the progression, how we can progress the patient from one stage to other stage. Initially, and the flexibility is main concern, and reducing fear will be with the hands-on mobilization, and we can increase the next level to the active management of patient with postural control, graded movement, and cardiovascular exercises. Okay, this is the basic pyramid which shows how the spinal rehabilitation would be. Okay, so the base of the spinal rehabilitation is the spinal flexibility exercises. Okay, so as I told you, the movement impairment reduce the movement and reduce the flexibility. That's the reason for chronic pain. So bringing back the flexibility is the main base of the spinal rehabilitation. Okay, so in this one, we can treat the patient with a slow, sustained stretching with the pain. So into the pain, we can slow give a sustained stretching that will promote the flexibility of the tighten structure. And the next level is spinal mobility. So bringing back to the spinal mobility, the mobility can be increased by mobilization, manipulation technique, and the tighten soft tissues of tighten structure. So this is completely, as I told you, the hands-on, the passive implementation from the physiotherapist to increase the mobility. So once the flexibility and mobility has been improved, then we can think of stability. That the motor control training plays. Okay, so the third part is the stability. The stability, we have to implement the motor control training in our rehabilitation program. And the last one is the spinal strengthening, the graded movement. We can give a minimal load, we can increase the load, or as you can increase with aerobic activity. So single leg standing. So those things can be implemented spinal strengthening technique. Okay, this is the basic pyramid which shows how the spinal rehabilitation would we can cope up with. So I can repeat this: the spinal flexibility is the base. Once you improve the spinal flexibility, so once the movement impairment happen, so producing the flexibility is the first concept. Once you can gain the flexibility slowly, then produce the spinal mobility. There's a movement of the spine as a concern. We can concern of movement of the spine and segments. And the third concept is a stability. So once the movement and flexibility is achieved, we can give a static exercise, that is a motor control training for the spinal cord to stabilize the spine. Because once we move on to the functional movement, the spine needs to get stabilized. So the mobility and flexibility is not going to stabilize. The exercise is not going to be stabilize the spine. So we should implement the motor control training to achieve stability. The last one is the strengthening program, because of stability, you have to think of the global muscle, which also give a contribution to the spinal stabilization. So the spinal strengthening technique to the global muscles as well as local muscle needs to be implemented on the last stage. So you can grade it from basic level to the advanced level. Okay, the first thing is first stage graduation of core stability. How we can graduate stability exercise from one stage to another stage. Okay, the base the beginning is first to educate the patient to activate a deep stabilizing. That is deep stabilizing is the local muscle. Okay, local muscle musculature while in the neutral position. It means that multifidus transverse abdominis, actually we have to educate the patient to activate the deep stabilizing muscle. So this will achieve the stability. And the next level, add extremity motion. Okay, once you achieve the stability, add extremity motion to the load. That's a global muscle. Okay, you can add some extremity motion once the spine has been stabilized. You can add some extremity motion to the spinal cord. That is going to involve the global musculature in the stability. And the third, increasing repetition to improve the holding capacity. That is endurance. Okay, so the stabilizing muscle needs to increase its holding capacity. So we can produce gradually implement the endurance over the stabilizing muscles. So that's the third stage. And the fourth stage, increasing load by change lever arm to assist the improve strength, maintaining a stable neutral position. Okay, increase the load to change the lever arm. So again, you are giving a load to the global muscles. So that's progressing a global muscle from a basic stage to advanced stage. And the next level, progress the movement from one position to the other position. Here the change of position. Okay, once you have to maintain the stability not only in this position, for example sitting to standing. So you are asking a patient to stabilize the spine in the sitting. Once the patient has been come to stand, the stabilization may lag. Okay, so the stability exercise needs to be given a positional change. Okay, so from one position to the other position, the stability should be maintained in all positions. That's why. So once that's why the patient can reproduce this stable, this neutral spine position at any point of time at any functional activity. Okay, and the sixth one is unstable surface improve the stabilizing. So the patient can be go with unstable surface. So the perturbation training will the last stage of the stabilizing exercise. While during the perturbation, over the sys ball, over the balancing board, the neutral position should be maintained, and the activation of core muscle, the activation of local and global muscle should be implemented. So coming to the intervention, segmental stability exercises. Okay. So as I told you, this is a completely, these exercises are static in nature, as the stabilizer is going to work out on the stabilizer. The activation of multifidus muscle. The patient position is in the crook lying. The activation of transverse abdominis, the patient position is in the crook lying position. The palpation 2 inches medial to ASIS, the 1 inch distals. Okay, the hand should be placed 2 inches medial to ASIS. Command, actually here the static contraction, here the position and the movement is very, very important. So that's why we keep training the patient on the crook lying position. Why this crook lying position? So in this position, no spinal movement, physiological movement is possible. The patient well rested on this position, and it allow the global muscle activation. It will avoid the global muscle activation, and we are going to only focus the local muscle stabilization on this position. That's why the patient has been pushed in the crook lying position. So the main command is breathe in, breathe out. As I told you, there's intra-abdominal pressure plays a role. So initially the breathing pattern induced with the exercise, breathe in, breathe out, and when near maximal exhalation, draw your belly button towards your spine. Draw your belly button towards your spine. Draw in your belly button towards your spine. Contraction should feel like a tension under the fingertips. Once they have do a proper contraction, the tension should be lies back of the fingertips. The patient should hold 10 seconds and repeat this for 3 sets, 10 repetition, 3 times per day. So to get this one, actually the main thing is here we are not focusing the repetition here. We are not focusing on the amount of contraction, but the thing is the perfection of movement is very, very important, because it's easy to say draw your abdomen in towards your spine, but the patient may go for compensation with pelvis rotation or maybe spinal curvature, increasing lordosis. So those things needs to be taken care. So that's why. So once you can see the top picture. So how the draw-in maneuver will stabilize, is going to act on the transverse abdomen, and how it will stabilize transverse abdominis. Okay, so this precising exercise is very, very important instead of giving a repetition. So the patient should give a control over the exercise, and it should be precise. Here the picture has been different. Okay, the multifidus muscle, it should be in the prone position. Usually the transverse abdominis and multifidus has a co-contraction. So usually when the patient position and under in the prone position, the therapist places the finger immediately lateral to the spinous process of the lumbar spine. Okay, the thumb or index finger of the therapist immediately place the lateral spinous process of the lumbar spine. As the commanders, as swell the muscle against the finger. The patient, the command from the therapist is swell the muscle out against the finger. So this facilitation techniques using a drawing in maneuver. Actually, once the patient is pushing the muscle against the therapist finger, facilitation techniques include using the drawing in maneuver, gently contracting the pelvic floor muscle. Drawing in maneuver, nothing but draw in your abdomen towards the spine. So that facilitation technique is induced. The hold for 10 seconds the same way. The hold for 10 seconds. Repeat 3 sets for 10 repetition. This is for multifidus muscle. So we can say very easily that the activation of multifidus draw in your abdomen, so towards your spine, swell your muscles. So these are not possible initially with low back patient, as they are not aware of the movement. They have not know the which muscle acting. As a therapist, we know the muscle action and the movement. We can say easily. Okay, so so initially, how can we achieve this? We can use the pressure biofeedback. So for the feedback of the patient, it gives the feedback of the patient as the muscle is getting activated or not. Okay, so here you can see the pressure by biofeedback. Yeah, this is the inflator. It's like a sphygmomanometer, handheld sphygmomanometer. It has a 3 chambers in it. Okay, it's inflated to spill. Actually, it has been inflated to spill space between the target body area. We can inflate it and we can place it where which muscle we are targeting. We can place under this. So the pressure dial of monitoring the pressure in the bank of feedbacks on the position. The pressure variation give the feedback to the patient, so they can hold the muscle or they can increase the contraction. So the feedback, according to the feedback, the patient can increase the contraction or they can increase the hold time. Okay. So here, this pressure fiber biofeedback inflated appropriate level. Actually, we have a baseline pressure. So when we place a empty bag, there is no resistance over the body. So here, the studies have given the baseline pressure for testing or training the muscle. So here we have to inflate up to the baseline pressure. So then it needs to be inflated up to the baseline according to the muscle testing, which muscle is going to test it. Okay. So here, the movement of the body part of the bag, if you inflate it to the baseline pressure, and the movement of the body part of away from the bag, the pressure is going to maintain or the pressure may get down. Okay, that's the one mechanism, and the another one is the movement of the body part into the bag. Into the bag, it increases the pressure. I will show the picture. You can get understand. Okay. This is just a handheld sphygmomanometer, okay, which usually used to measure blood pressure. Okay, so it's a handheld one. Okay, this is the same concept. Here we use for pressure biofeedback. Okay, so here we have to inflate the bag up to the baseline pressure. Okay. Inflating bag up to the baseline pressure. For example, in this testing the extensor endurance, testing the multifidus muscle. So I have inflated the bag, okay, up to 40 mmHg. Okay, see in this dial, it has been inflated up to 40 mm of Hg. So inflation, okay, the bag now has been inflated. So it's inflated, okay. This bag has been placed below the below back, okay. In the supine lying, the bag has been, you can see the picture, okay. Bag has been placed below the back, okay. So once the patient has been here, I'd ask the patient to draw in abdomen towards the spine, okay. Here, ask the patient to draw in abdomen. So here in this moment, will give a little pressure. So see here, the pressure is getting increased once the patient started to press the back. So this is the this is this will say the activation of multifidus muscle. So once once the muscle has been activated, so you can ask the patient to maintain certain time to increase the endurance of the muscle. Okay, if the patient is releases, again the base value, there is a base that is 40 mm of Hg came down. If it is the patient is producing the force over the bag with the contraction of multifidus, again the pressure may increases. Okay, that then the pressure variation and the time duration, the pressure variation says how much the force excreted by the multiple, that is the strength of the muscle, and the maintaining time will say the endurance, the muscle endurance, how far the muscle can withhold the position. So the same way, checking the transverse abdominis, again inflating the baseline value to the 70 mm of Hg. Okay, so think of inflating the bag 70 mm of Hg. Okay, inflated. This baseline value is decided by the various researchers on biofeedback technique, and this researchers will give a baseline pressure with how much amount of pressure needs to be kept as a baseline for different type of muscles. Okay, here the transverse abdominis, we have a 70 mm of Hg based as a baseline pressure. Okay, so once the is inflated to 70 mm of Hg, it's going to, the bag is going to be kept below the abdomen. You can see the picture. So you can below the abdomen. Once you keep the bag below the abdomen, so slight pressure over the bag is increasing the pressure over the needle. Okay, slight pressure. Okay, increase the baseline value. So here, ask the patient to draw in the abdomen. So the pressure is going to decrease slightly, decrease down to some value, decrease down according to the activation of muscle. Okay, so here the patient is withdrawing the force, so away from the bag. So the resistance over the bag is coming down, the pressure is going to getting down. Okay, so this value is again saying how much strength of the transverse abdominis and how far he can hold, says the endurance of the transverse abdominis. Okay, this is what the pressure biofeedback, the same way. Actually the chamber is a little bit different. So here the sphygmomanometer has only one chamber, but in the biofeedback we have a 3 chambers. So we even actually the biofeedback rate is about 8,000, I think 7,500 to 8,000. For simple thing, we can use this sphygmomanometer for to train local muscle of local stabilizing muscles. Okay. So once we are training, actually the patient should learn. Okay, so we have talked about the control, how we can train it. Okay, but the learning, so once you teach, okay, and the patient should learn the technique. Okay, the learning technique is highly depend on the patients. Okay, highly depend on the patient understanding. Usually if you give a skill, for example any skill have a 3 stages of learning. One is the cognitive phase, and another one is the associative phase and autonomous phase. Okay, for example we can not go into the elaborately this one. You think of car driving. Okay, so you are learning a car driving. Okay, so the cognitive phase, what do you do? Initially you think you actually, I think many of you come across the car driving initially. You look where the gear is. Okay, and where the clutch is. Okay, and you depend on the visual cues, and you're not focusing on the road properly initial stages. So you may most often you rely the visual cues, and that's why it says actually as a mainly. So here you make a large errors, okay? So initially, so once you train with skills, if you're learning any skills, for example, not even driving, you think of tennis or you think of any sports activity, usually you do make a lot of errors. These all comes under the cognitive phase. Once you come across this phase, once you practice and little bit get trained, okay, you come across this phase. The next one is you focus how I drive perfectly. You will focus how I drive perfectly instead of relying on visual cues. Here, the simple element of performance to consistent of performance. Okay, so you will not rely on visual cues. However, you may have a little bit fear to drive faster, or you a little bit little bit fear to take a reverse. So initially, this will comes under the cognitive phase. Okay, so once this further practice will take you to the autonomous phase, there you will not relay your visual cues. You will not relay your think of where you are driving, how you are driving. You won't think anything. So only the success is the main here. The success is and the achievement is the main thing. You style, you drive in your own style, and you drive fast. You make a U-turn, whatever it is. That is comes in different style. Once you well practice, you well learn the movement. The same thing. Once you practicing tennis initially, that's where the ball is coming, so you may focus that one. But once you have been trained perfectly, so you won't think of all those things. So if I ask you where you put your brake, actually which place you have used your brake, and which place you have used your third gear, and where you have shifted from your third to fourth gear, this will not come under your mind. It's completely, the movement is autonomous. Okay, so you will, even you won't think of that. So I have to shift the gear. So if it is, if you are slowing down your car, automatically the movement goes, the gear goes to, you are reducing the gear to one or two. Okay, it's completely autonomous. You will not even have a consciousness of the driving. So the previous one, you may have a consciousness of driving. If somebody is crossing, so you have to immediately applying brake. Okay, so those things will not come in the third stage. It's completely, the movement is autonomous. This is what the learning. Okay, so any skill, not only a driving, you are learning a skill, or you are learning a carom, you are any motor skill, you are achieving any motor skill. These three phases are the must one. You have to come across three phases. Once you are autonomous phase, one comes to the autonomous phase, the movement is completely entirely is very easy. So what, how this stages is going to implement the segmental pattern is, so initially you are training initially you are training the exercises. Okay, whatever the exercise we are giving exercises. And second thing, you are asking the patient to do exercises in various stages. You are asking the exercises to do in the various stages, and the patient is trained in the associative phase. Okay, once the repeated practice of these exercises, the patient can easily reproducible. No, he won't think of where I need to stabilize my spine. Okay, I have to pull my abdomen towards my spinal cord. These and all things will not comes under the play once the patient has been promoted to the autonomous phase. Okay, so here the patient, the exercise also learning. So each and every exercise also learning. Once initially the patient may do lot of errors. Okay, so you have to correct the error with repeated feedbacks, and you have to repeat it correct the error with biofeedback, those kind of feedbacks. And once the error has been completed, as the patient may move on to the associative phase. That means that he can little bit practice, he can easily reproduce the movement. Once he can reproduce the movement easily with a precise way, you can add many weight graded exercises. He can make a master of those exercises. That's the progression of the exercise from one stages to other stage. So here the stages of segmental control, we have a three stages. The one is a local segmental control, that is especially training the local muscle. And the exercise should give a use the closed chain segmental control. It means a closed kinematic chain. We use the exercise in a closed kinematic chain. And the third one is open chain segmental control. So the third one is open chain segmental control. We implement the exercise in open kinematic chains. Okay. I think the picture is not clear a bit. So here you can see three circles, okay? The circles inside, and the circle intermediate, and the circle outer ring, and the inner ring, and the intermediate ring. So inner ring will give a local segmental control. That's mean that initially the patient with the training with biofeedback, when with a non-weight bearing position, sitting position, activation of stabilization exercises, okay, and the lying position, use of biofeedback, activation of transverse abdominis, those things comes under the local segmental control. Once the patient has been practiced with the local segmental control, you are promoting to the next level, that mm, close chain segmental control. In that, the stabilization, the must is the stabilization are being practiced, so the patient can reproduce the stabilization position in the close chain movements, especially sitting or off squatting or wall squatting, whatever it is. The patient can stabilize the spinal segment on this position. So once this position has been mastered, then moving on to open chain segmental control. In this position, again, the spinal stabilization is reproduced with open kinematic chains, like lifting the limbs or moving the limbs or kicking the ball, whatever the functional activity during exercise on the limbs, all those limb activity. But all this thing, the stabilization should be taken care. Okay, the patient should be taken care with the position of the activation of the transverse abdominis, along with the multifidus, co-contraction of multifidus should be taken care of all this position. So the spine will not move, or the spine will not get damaged when moved to the loading activity. These are the some example. Initially, the local control, the patient has been trained with the non-weight bearing position. So here the stew posture has been corrected with the normal neutral position of the spine. So here the ultrasonic feedback of activation of multifidus muscle. So the patient given as a biofeedback technique. So once it's promoted to the closed kinematic chain, so initially you can off the load, you can reduce your load by wall squatting, reproducing the spinal stabilization while doing your wall squatting, and over the perturbation training. So reproducing the spinal, all this training, the spine stabilization must be induced. Okay, so the drawing in abdomen and towards the spine, that stabilization technique is the precise, it should be used precisely. Then only the patient has been promoted. The patient feel the effect of the exercises. Okay, so this one, the patient was over the perturbation board, actually the balancing board. Again the ultrasonic feedback of activating the transverse abdomination and maintaining the stabilization over the vibration board. So all this one as it comes under the closed kinematic chain. So even the functional activity in the walking, so maintaining walking over the grass or over the sand, so those things we can implement as a graded exercise. So all this movement should, functional movement should maintain and focus the stabilization of the spine. And the open kinematic chain, again the open kinematic chain, you can incorporate with your limb movements. So you can increase so hand movement along with the leg movements. So all those things is accompanied with pressure biofeedback. So maintaining the stability of the spine during the limb movement has been encouraged. So it has been progressed to further weight training like a deadlift or a squatting technique. All the graded exercise should, we should focus the stabilization of the spine. That's all here. Thank you for the time you spend the time with me. Any questions or any remarks, any feedbacks? Shankaran?